The Honorable Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Datuk Sri Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector International Islamic University of Malaysia, His Excellency Mr. Hiroshi Oka, the Japanese Ambassador to Malaysia, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to organizing committee, in particular, and the International Islamic University of Malaysia in general, for giving me an opportunity to deliver an address speech on world peace awareness, especially on the subject of remembering Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. Let me take the issue from the international relation perspective. We cannot talk about world peace without looking back at the history that nearly destroyed humankind. Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombings are points in reference. When nuclear bombs were dropped by the United States over the city of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and 3 days later on Nagasaki, it has been a major strategic and political consequences to not only the international security environment, but also a political rivalry among two superpowers during that time, i.e. the United States and the Soviet Union. This was the era where concepts such as nuclear deterrence, mutual assured destruction or MAD, weapons of mass destruction, WMD, were famously quoted among policymakers and the academia. It marks in the world history, first time ever, that WMD were used in major wars. Secondly, it also marks the beginning of the nuclear arms races among major powers. Luckily, the world was on a great relief when the two superpowers, United States and Soviet Union, agreed to pull a brakes by signing various agreements such as the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, the Strategic Arms Limitation Agreement, or SALT I and SALT II, the Anti-Ballistic Missiles Treaty, ABM, or Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, or CTBT. But unfortunately, the agreements for me did not compel others to follow suit. There are other countries that refuse to sign and even withdraw from to sign the NPT agreement due to their strategic and national interests. One immediate question raised by many critics was, is it necessary to use nuclear weapons to end the war as soon as possible? The traditionalists argue that the bombs were necessary steps to force Japan to surrender. They argue that the land invasion of Japan by the American and Soviet forces would have taken more time and life than the bombs did. Yet the revisionists argue that the bombing could be avoided, if not because the American was too obsessed of having the technology ahead of its competitors, namely the Soviet Union and the German. It was argued that Japan was more compelled to surrender after the Soviet invasion of Manchuria in August 1945. Even Japanese messages intercepted by United States military intelligence indicating that the Japanese had been trying to surrender conditionally since June 1945. But the desire to avenge Pearl Harbor and the ghastly treatment of American prisoners of war had overridden the desire to end the war peacefully. Furthermore, a scholar named Shermi argues that Truman administration was having a choice. It was said publicly that his motivation to end the war as quickly as possible was to save the American lives. But we miss another salient idea here, which basically was discussed among the political elites in Washington, D.C. during that time, that the choice was also rested on Americans' wartime strategic decisions to control Joseph Stalin's post-war ambitions. The American, it was argued that, was actually wanted to prove its superior military capacity to the Soviet Union and was determined to use the atomic bombs for that purpose. It was also believed that Soviet Union was in the midst of developing nuclear capability due to the Kremlin's own intelligent information that Germans was also having that kind of technology. The Truman administration also hopes that the bombs would curb Stalin's ambitions in Eastern Europe and in the Far East. American officials calculated that by using the atomic bomb would enormously bolster American diplomacy vis-a-vis the Soviet Union in negotiation over both post-Cold War Europe and the Far East. At the same time, the pressure on senior Manhattan Project administrators was mounting to justify the money, materials, and talent spent to build the atomic bombs. Finally, it was argued that the decision was also based on the American belief that had Soviet entered the Pacific War against Japan, other Western allies were anxious that they would not gain any geopolitical territory in resource-rich Asia as they had done in Europe. The history has also shown us that the wartime alliance between the American and the Soviet Union soon dissolved into intense rivalry, which continued to influence global relations within 7 decades. By 1948, the Soviet Union had tested its first atomic bomb. As a result, fear and distrust in international relations had become so entrenched, and the world was then forced to live under the shadow of mutually assured destructions. What are the lessons learned, and how could we sustain world peace without nuclear? What I can say that the world is hardly learning from these disastrous episodes. The atomic bomb of Japan was hugely significant final act of the most destructive global conflict in human history. Simultaneously, it signaled the dawn of atomic age, the arms race between the American and the Soviet Union, and before long, the Cold War. Between 6,000 and 80,000 people were killed instantly when the bomb detonated over Hiroshima, and estimated 140,000 died from acute effects of the bomb before the end of the year. The death toll increased to over 200,000 people in subsequent decades as people died from cancer and other diseases linked to radiation poisoning. Nuclear weapons are depicted as so inhumane as to justify global prohibition of their productions, retention, or use. Any future nuclear weapon is predicted to have far more severe humanitarian and environmental consequences than the 1945 strikes on Japan. It has been argued that NPT regimes faced with a period of uncertainty. North Korea, India, Pakistan, Iran left the treaty. Another attempt has been mounted. The world community, through the United Nations, introduced another legal binding treaty called the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. States that wish to become parties to the treaty must commit to the total elimination of nuclear weapons. The text of the treaty was adopted by 122 countries in 1917. As today, only 16 states has signed the treaty, and of those, 13 have ratified it. 37 more ratifications are needed to make the treaty binding. Unfortunately, none of the 9 nuclear power countries, United States, Russia, United Kingdom, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, support the total ban. It also should be highlighted that global nuclear weapons stockpile still stands at over 14,000 warheads, despite decades of disarmament efforts. 90% of these weapons are held by the Americans and the Russians. What can I say? That we have a long way to go for a sustainable world peace with the world free of nuclear weapons. Given that world is also facing with another pressing security threats like the current pandemics, it is hard to persuade some nation states to let it go. But there is also hope that if we come together to reject it and teach our future generations the ugly side of nuclear weapons, I believe that we can still achieve the world peace. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.